What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 70, and I'm the host, Kyle Lansalone. Solo show today, a lot of news to cover, some really important stories that haven't gotten hardly any media attention at all with this impeachment circus and everything else going on. So I want to dive into a lot of those things. Some of them are indications of where Joe Biden's foreign policy is going, where he's breaking with Trump, where he's staying with Trump. Other stuff has to do with like social networks and marijuana laws. So wide variety of topics on today's show. Make sure you share it. Find the show online. The video version is available at YouTube. It's also now available at Library and Odysee. So if you use those YouTube alternatives, subscribe to the show there. The URL is /COI, or you could find the URL and all the links that you would need for the show at the Libertarian Institute, where I publish a show notes page. libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle is the URL for all my work, including my daily news roundup. There you'll find the links to Patreon, Subscribestar, and then the donation addresses for Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash if you would like to donate to the show in crypto. If you donate to the show, send me an email message somewhere and I will let you in on the private Discord server I have set up. You could recommend news topics to talk about, or we could just talk news or suggest guests, stuff like that. The last thing you could do to support the show is support the sponsor. That is Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is where you go to get your CBD products. Right now, they have a deal on their extract with melatonin. The co-host of the show, Will Porter, has recommended it as being helpful in helping fall asleep if you got insomnia. I've personally been using the Slav stick a lot. It's great. It has CBD in it and it relieves minor pain. So I've been using it on like my neck and back in the afternoon, sitting working on my laptop all day recording these podcast episodes. Definitely, makes you a little bit sore, and so that's been helping with that. So PalomaVerdeStore.com. Also use the promo code PEACE. That lets them know that you came from Conflicts of Interest, but also gets you a discount. So make sure you use that when you check out at PalomaVerdeStore.com. Now let's get into the news. First story here is from, I guess, a story that really happened over the summer during the Black Lives Matter protest. You had this older gentleman, his first name is Martin, be pushed down by Buffalo cops. The Buffalo cops were in full riot gear. They had on the Kevlar vests, they had on the helmets with the shields, they were carrying their batons, and an elderly man, and the kind of elderly where you don't walk normal anymore, and the kind of guy you see fall down the way he falls, you wonder if he's gonna ever get back up. You know what I mean? And then the police officers make sure that they don't give him medical care, and it's not even until a National Guardsman, he's in fatigue, so I believe he's National Guard, walks by and seems to have any interest at all about this elderly man who's bleeding from the back of his head. So two officers pushed him to the ground. I'm not sure. I don't think they're actually former officers yet. I think they're still suspended with pay. Their names are Aaron Torgolinski and Robert McCabe, and they have been charged with assault for pushing this man to the ground. However, a grand jury dismissed those charges, and that's the big news here is that they're not going to face any punishment for shoving Martin Gungio to the ground on June 4th. This is the kind of thing that I've been talking about on the show, that you have to hold police accountable, or else you're going to continue to have this kind of police abuse. Nobody wants to see the police beat up on elderly, or children for that matter, in our streets especially. And whenever that happens, you have to absolutely punish the cop that does it, hold them accountable. Just like, imagine if this was a group of young kids who went and pushed this old man to the ground. What would you do to those? What would you want those kids? Assault charges, multiple years in prison. I think that would be the punishment that people look for. You have to do the same things with the cops, or the cops are going to continue doing this. That's why it's so important that, repeal legislation that either gives more favorable grounds to cops in court to say that, well, if if other cops say they would have acted in this way, that's okay. We have qualified immunity legislation and other things that give, cops all this preference. Not to mention that two men shoved an elderly guy to the ground in front of a whole bunch of cops, and the rest of the cops just escorted the two police officers to continue on with their duty to maybe push an elderly man to the ground. Nobody bothered to arrest them or even seem to be very concerned that they just did this to that guy. Nope, they just continue on with their jobs. It's the video is something to see. I'll play it here one more time just because the way it plays out, it is so disturbing. How they push this guy to the ground and everybody walks past him. But just to know that this happened and the cops won't face punishment is so disturbing, and is about where we're at with policing in the U.S. today. Next article I have is from Federal Times, titled "Bill Would Cut Over 100,000 DoD Jobs." This is by Jesse Burr. The article lays out a bill by California Republican Representative Kevin Colbert. I don't really know anything else about this Kevin Colbert guy. I could look into him if this bill moves forward. From what's laid out in this article, I don't think this bill has a whole lot of other support or co-sponsors yet, but it's pretty interesting. It's titled "Rebalance for an Effective Defense Uniform and Civilian Employees Act," and what Representative Colbert did is he took the recommendations that were laid out by the Defense Business Board in 2015, and they recommended to cut over 100,000 federal jobs at the DoD civilian jobs, and that's about a 15% cut in DoD workforce. The way that this is going to be done is not by the way I would do it, which is just fire 100,000 people tomorrow. That sounds absolutely fantastic. But rather, they are looking to take or just not replenish the jobs after people leave, not rehire the jobs after people leave for the next 4 years. And so, according to the Office of Personnel Management, they say that just under 82,000 employees left the DoD each year, meaning that 4 years, that's about a 250,000. And so if you only, you're even still replacing half the jobs of people leaving. It's not like every single person that leaves you have to fire to make to get within this number. This is apparently going to save a lot of money, although I think this bill just puts it in other places in the DoD, which isn't great. However, it definitely seems like the Pentagon is overstaffed. It has 2 million employees or so, with 1.3 million being active duty, uniformed military, and then just over 750,000 federal employees, civilian contractors. And that's the number that I guess would drop to probably about 650,000 if this bill ends up being passed. I'll try to keep an eye on this bill. If it starts to gain momentum, I'll look into it a little bit more, see what the numbers are, and see maybe if amendments could be introduced to pass some of the savings on to the taxpayer. All right, the next article I have is some bad news out of South Dakota. For all my South Dakota listeners out there who enjoy a little bit of marijuana, your governor is working against you. This article is from Reason by Scott Shackford, titled "Judge Tosses Out South Dakota Ballot Initiative Legalizing Recreational Marijuana." The subtitle: "Voters approved it, but the governor resisted. A court came down on her side." So the bad news right there is in the headlines, but when you look at the details, this gets even a little bit more shocking. So the ballot initiative in South Dakota, I believe there were two for marijuana this past year, one for recreational and one for medical. The medical one passed with like a 70% approval, but then the recreational one passed 54 to 40 sit. So that was still a pretty good margin of approval. However, the governor opposed this and finally got herself a judge to undo it. It was the Circuit Court judge in South Dakota that decided that ballot referendums are limited to one single issue. And because the referendum on recreational marijuana said that it was legal and said that it would be regulated, that was two separate issues, even though I'm sure if, they tried to pass one that just was recreational, just legalized marijuana with nothing, then the governor would have found some way to find a court to say we can't do this because you can't just legalize marijuana with no rules. And so, they kind of make it so they win either way on this issue, it seems. But the judge tossed out that ballot referendum. There's something particularly insulting here to the South Dakota taxpayers, where the governor, is paid with taxpayer money, right? Her job is to represent the will of the people who vote her to office. And so, she's supposed to approve, and support this referendum if that's what people want, but she's working against it. She's being paid with their money to work against it. And she's using even more of their money to take this to court, eat up more court resources to, work against something that the South Dakota taxpayers want. It's absolutely terrible. Now, the good news is there is apparently a marijuana caucus of quite a few Republicans in the South Dakota legislature, and they are working towards legalizing marijuana anyway. So this is bad news, good news, because it looks like maybe they will be able to, smoke pot legally in South Dakota. It's also pretty, I think, telling of who Kristi Noem is. She's somebody who's gotten a lot of credit in some circles or hate in others for her response to the COVID virus. But a lot of libertarians have, and myself, have said good things about her because she's, refused to let her state and her businesses be completely shut down. And, people should have the right to decide how they're going to respond to the coronavirus. The government shouldn't be able to dictate all of that. But yeah, she's like, oh yeah, it'd be terrible to lock a business down. But yeah, some, kids out there smoking pot, she has no problem with throwing him in a cage and locking him down for doing that. And so, it's kind of revealing of who she is. The next story I have, I think, is a lot more important than for the amount of attention it's gotten, definitely. I think it may shed some light into what's been happening in YouTube the past couple of years. And so this is from Reuters. It's titled, YouTube Earns Accreditation for Protecting Advertisers from Unsuitable Videos. And what this is, it's a pretty short article, but what it says is Alphabet Inc.'s YouTube said Tuesday it had become the first digital platform to receive accreditation from the Media Ratings Council, signifying the streaming video service effectively protects its advertisers from appearing on content deemed inappropriate for paid ads. The company said in a blog post it was committed to remaining at least 99% effective at making sure ad placements on YouTube are brand safe. And so getting into what the Media Rating Council is and its accreditation makes this kind of interesting, because this is the group that basically has now said that YouTube takes such precautions and censors content and demonetizes any content that's inappropriate. So, all the big brands know that, their ad won't appear on something that's quote unquote inappropriate. Now, what is inappropriate isn't really discussed, and I was having a lot of trouble finding anywhere on the Media Rating Council's website where they lay out anything specific as far as this content is inappropriate and this content is, which is a very important question. What I was able to find out about the Media Ratings Council was, some stuff through their website, which, let me tell you something, is one of the oldest websites that I've encountered in the past year. And there's not a whole lot of information on it, but they do say that a lot of their decisions are based on their members who pay an awful lot of money for their services. And so their members are essentially giant media or other giant companies. So I have the list up here for people looking at the YouTube version. If people are interested, Media Ratings Council, just Google it. You could go to their website and you could see all this. They have named MasterCard, Anheuser-Busch, CBS, MSNBC, BuzzFeed, things that seem like larger kind of corporations, Outdoor Sportsman Group. They have Coca-Cola and Pepsi, Pfizer, Colgate, PBS, Pandora, Snap, Sony, Turner Broadcasting, and I'm not there. There's a list of probably 100 to 200 names here. ESPN, Fox. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just wanted to mention some of the bigger ones so you get an idea of who these, companies are that are apparently pretty critical in setting the standards for what's happening on YouTube. Because according from what I was able to discern, there was a pretty good article in the Wall Street Journal in 2015 on the Media Ratings Council, and then the YouTube page had some information. The Media Ratings Council, by the way, was formed under a different name in 1964 as a result of the Harris Commission, so some kind of congressional thing, and I guess has mostly been involved in making sure that when they say so many people watch this thing or see this kind of thing, that actually is the case. There's only a few actual employees. I can't figure out who the actual employees are. If anybody could find more information on this group and send it to me, I really appreciate that. But there's about 5 full-time employees, and they have actually Ernst & Young do all the actual work, and I guess the employees just publish the information and make sure it stays safe. Ernst & Young does very expensive audits, the companies themselves, so YouTube would pay for their audit from Ernst & Young, and then the report would go to the Media Ratings Council, and then the Media Ratings Council would make that report available to other members. If I'm understanding this process completely correct from the information I've been able to read. And so then the members, once they're in the club, get to decide what the standards are for other members. And so it seems like all these companies probably have an awful lot of influence on what's being allowed to be seen and monetized on YouTube. And it really hasn't, been discussed as a part of it. But I guess these accreditations are pretty hard to get. YouTube, again, the only digital platform that has one. And so, yeah, trying to figure out more about this, but I think it's a pretty important story that hasn't gotten a whole lot of attention. All right, a couple stories about Facebook here. This first from CNN. Facebook will start showing some of its users less political content. Once you get into the weeds here, it's not quite as exciting as the headline makes it sound. It's going to start off, I believe, this week for a small percentage of people in Brazil, Indonesia, and Canada to start seeing less political content. And then in the coming weeks, a small number of U.S. users will also get the same treatment. I don't know if Facebook is going to market for you like, hey, you're getting less political content, or if it's just going to happen. It's interesting that this is happening now that Biden is president. I think it's going to for conservatives feel like there's an intentional effort to make it to make people less politically outraged, to put less about what's going on in their faces, because things under Biden are going to be pretty similar to what they were under Trump. But if it's not, constantly being shared on all the social media platforms, then it's just going to feel like less bad stuff is happening. And so I think that's like kind of the conspiracy minded side of it, but it is interesting about the timing of it. And that Facebook isn't like more focused on, I guess, having an algorithm that shows you more content that you like. So, I like something and, another person has liked something and they've liked 3 other posts. It would make sense that Facebook would show me then those 3 other posts and have the algorithms kind of built like that, rather than specifically trying to show like puppy versus cat videos or political versus non-political content. Also, what is and isn't political, I think could be pretty questionable. The next one, also from CNN, titled Facebook is trying to fix its anti-vaxxer problem again. Of course, this is a really loaded headline from CNN. That Facebook has an anti-vaxxer problem, or that anti-vaxxer in itself is a problem. Now, people who don't do any vaccines at all, maybe, if a large portion of society start doing that, there would be some negative, like, medical, polio outbreak or something like that. At the same time, people being skeptical of vaccines, I think is fair. And I think this big notion that anybody who is skeptical of vaccines is an anti-vaxxer pushes a lot of people in to be more anti-vaxxer than they otherwise would be. But anyways, Facebook is going to try to crack down on anybody posting things questionable about vaccines. I'm sure that this has, they'll make it about polio and measles and stuff like that, but far more about making people comfortable with the COVID vaccine, which I believe the government is about to drop $1 billion to try to propagandize people into taking that thing. The next article I have is about vaccinations. This is from ABC7 in New York. Biden administration to deploy 1,100 troops in effort to help COVID vaccination efforts. Depending on how this, this whole thing goes, I mean, I guess it's not the worst thing. If the, Army has doctors and nurses who could give out vaccinations, and that there's a greater demand for vaccinations than, there are people that could give those out. Although at this point, it seems like the shortage isn't necessarily in personnel, but rather the shortage is in the doses of vaccines. Although there have been populations where, I think in LA, they were offering it to healthcare workers, and a whole bunch of them didn't even want it. So there are populations where I think there's probably been more supply than demand, but generally it seems like we're still at a place where there's more demand than supply with this vaccine. My concern about the Army getting involved in this, of course, is when they decide that people need to take the vaccine, and maybe then the Army shows up at your house or something that says you need to take that thing, this thing. Not that we're there yet, or that there's indication of this turning in to that, but at the same time, once we put ourselves on the road of using the military to distribute this vaccine, I think we're taking steps in that direction. All right, we have the State Department approving its first weapon sales under the Biden administration. This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. He writes, on Friday, the Pentagon announced that the State Department approved potential arms sales to Chile and NATO worth an estimated $150 million combined. The announcement marks the first approved weapon sales of the Biden administration. The Pentagon Defense Security Cooperation Agency, DSCA, said the government of Chile requested the purchase of 16 Standard Missiles -2 Block IIIA missiles and related equipment worth an estimated $85 million. The primary contractor for the Chile missile deal is Raytheon, the most recent employer of recently confirmed Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. For NATO, the State Department approved the potential sale of radio communications equipment worth approximately $65 million. I'm focused more on the missile sales to Chile, just because I feel like, why will we sell missiles to Chile? It's an interesting question when the U.S. taxpayer contributes so much to the research and development and the production of these missiles. I think we should have a say over where they go if it advances the foreign policy and security interests of the people of the United States. I'm not sure why selling missiles to Chile would do that, but yeah, they're moving ahead with that. Also, there's been a lot of instability in Chile in the past year, and so it doesn't seem clear that we know who the government of Chile is going to be in a year, 3 years, or 5 years. And so do we want to just, load up this South American country with missiles? It's also very interesting that the first missile sale to go through is from Raytheon, where, of course, as Dave DeCamp mentions, our Secretary of Defense previously worked. It's a crazy conflict of interest that you could be Secretary of Defense when having just sat on the board of a weapons company. The next story I have is also from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Ukraine plans new Black Sea bases as U.S. and NATO step up presence in the region. And so we have U.S. warships drilling in the Black Sea. I think there's actually 3 warships in the Black Sea right now. But the most probably provocative thing going on is Ukraine's plan to build 2 naval bases, one in the Black Sea and then one on the Sea of Azov. So for people not watching the video, it's probably might be hard to picture the Black Sea in your mind, but is the body of water north of Turkey. There's kind of a potato shape-ish. It borders Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and then, as I said, Turkey and Georgia. And the Crimean Peninsula jets out into it, and then the Crimean Peninsula meeting with the Russian landmass forms then the Sea of Azov, which is a smaller body of water north of the Black Sea. And so the Ukraine coastline on the Black Sea, building a naval base there, I'm not sure how provocative that will be towards NATO, but they did announce the plans for the new bases at the NATO headquarters. And so I'm sure that's probably the most threatening part of this to Russia, is that this is occurring at the NATO headquarters. And if this is just a Ukrainian naval base, that's one thing. But if it's a combined project with NATO, or it's to help facilitate NATO, interference and involvement in the Black Sea, well, that's something Russia doesn't want, because, the Black Sea is off the Russian coast, kind of like the U.S. would probably be opposed to Mexico announcing that they're going to build a naval base in the Gulf of Mexico, right on next to the coast with Texas, in Moscow. That would seem a hell of a lot more productive, provocative, that they just announced that in Mexico. Now, the Sea of Azov is a lot more complicated. Prior to 2014, the Crimean Peninsula was owned by Ukraine. However, the U.S. orchestrated a coup there, and in reaction to that coup and the fact that the coup government was going to kick Russia out of their naval base on the Crimean Peninsula, and that the people of Crimea saw themselves as more Russian than Ukrainian, and the new Ukrainian government was very nationalist and very right-wing. They broke away. Russia reabsorbed Crimea. And so now when you look at the Sea of Azov, both of the gates to the Sea of Azov are actually controlled by Russia. So if Ukraine builds a naval base there, and they're bringing warships in and out of the Sea of Azov from the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov, we've seen in the past that this caused a confrontation with Russia. And, there was a lot of fear mongering and, claim that the U.S. needs to get involved and confront Russia in the Sea of Azov, which is pretty close to a Russian lake. If anybody wants to look at the map on it, it is a potential flashpoint. So it's pretty concerning that they're building these naval bases. It'll definitely be something we have to keep our eye on. All right, we have this story from Reuters. U.S. State Department expects Blinken and the Turkish foreign minister to chat, but says policy on S-400 will remain unchanged. And so this is something I've talked a lot about on the show, because Turkey is a NATO ally. Turkey is very involved in Syria and has a lot of influence and impact on the U.S. Policy for Syria, which, we've been at war there for almost a whole decade now. And this article says that the Secretary of State Blinken is expected to talk with his Turkish counterpart, but that he will reiterate the American policy on opposing Turkey's Russian S-400 missile purchase will remain unchanged. Important things that came with this So Turkey bought the S-400 missile system from Russia a few years ago. This is an air defense system, and at the time they said that there would create too many strategic problems for the U.S. and NATO, because Turkey's a NATO country, because Turkey was a part of the F-35 project. They're supposed to have American-made or Western-made air defense, all their military systems are supposed to be from, Western countries. Well, buying this from Russia, they said was a security breach and all that. I guess Turkey thought they were better weapon systems and would make a better deal and maybe even provide like a check against NATO countries, because there's a lot of tension in NATO between Turkey and other members, and not just the U.S., but also France. So Turkey was eventually kicked out of the F-35 project for this, and the U.S. has been threatening sanctions on Turkey in response, and I think actually put some sanctions on Turkey towards the end of the Trump administration. And so we now know that Biden is going to continue this policy. In a sense, I'm not necessarily opposed to it because it ends up with the U.S. selling less weapons to Turkey. Not a big fan of sanctions, but I don't think these are widespread sanctions and just target Turkey's defense department or acquisition area. Now, the F-35, I think they're still making some parts for that in Turkey because they haven't found a U.S. manufacturer to make it. It was super expensive, like $500 million to kit Turkey out of the project and find other plants or make other plants to make those parts elsewhere. So that was a blow to the U.S. taxpayers. Of course, we should all just cancel the F-35 project and move on. We have some news on Biden's Israel policy. Now, if you pay attention to the mainstream media, you may have actually heard a little bit about Biden's Israel policy because people are starting to make a little bit of news out of the fact that Joe Biden hasn't yet had a direct phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And so they're kind of making it out to be like, oh, the U.S. is moving away from Israel. Biden's being so much tougher on Israel. However, we have this from Mondo Weiss titled, Secretary of State Blinken confirms Biden admin considers Jerusalem to be Israel's capital. This was something that happened towards the beginning of the Trump administration and was rightly labeled, a mistake. It was an insult to the Palestinians. It kind of indicated that, we're taking a more favorable stance towards Israel in the whole dispute there. And so they're saying that they're going to continue with that Trump policy. And so it's interesting. They try to make it out that, Biden's been a very different president than Trump. But this is another area where they're pretty much the same. Even on this Golan Heights issue, where Blinken was a little bit wishy-washy, I guess, is the way to describe it, because he didn't say that the Golan is not a part of Israel, but he said it was important to Israel's security rather than saying it's just a part of Israel. And so Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, came out and said that no, it is a part of Israel and it will always be. So, while there have been some differences in Biden and Trump's Mideast policy so far, Turkey, Israel are looking about the same. Now we'll get on to Iran. Dave DeCamp again at antiwar.com. Iran Zarif, that's their foreign minister, says window is closing for Biden to revive JCPOA. That's the Iran nuclear deal. And he says in the subtitle here, Zarif said Biden should learn from Trump's maximum failure. Of course, that's kind of a play on words because Trump called his Iran policy a maximum pressure campaign. And really that just meant sanctions, depriving the Iranian people of what they need, medicines during a pandemic, is kind of how that's played out. Because of that, because the fact that the U.S. went back on the nuclear deal, Iran has been taking steps to move away from the deal themselves, because within the deal, they limited their civilian nuclear energy program and put restrictions on it that other countries aren't required to. And so now they're moving away from those restrictions and advancing, again, their nuclear energy program. Everybody in Iran is still pretty clear that, they're maintaining that right now we just have a nuclear energy program. Although I have heard, I think their intelligence chief or somebody recently suggested that, hey, it won't stay a civilian program forever if the U.S. never votes the hostile policy. What I've seen from the Biden administration is disturbing on this issue. When Biden was talking to, I can't, somebody from MSNBC asked him if Iran would have to stop enriching uranium before the U.S. removes sanctions, and Biden said yes. Now the Biden administration got out there pretty quickly and clarified that, hey, our president is just maybe a little slow and didn't realize what the question was, and actually, you're allowed to enrich uranium as laid out in the JCPOA, but no higher, rather than, going along with Biden, which almost would be, really changing the deal to say that they were, requiring Iran not to enrich uranium at all. But the problem is, of course, is that the U.S. is the one that initially broke the deal, and the Biden policy isn't that the U.S. is now going to be the ones to first re-enter the deal, or is even shown a willingness to do a step-by-step process with the Iranians, but rather seems committed to forcing the Iranians back to the deal first, and in a way they're really keeping with the Trump policy here. Especially because I think there's members of the Biden administration that they think because of Trump's maximum pressure campaign, even though maybe they wouldn't have agreed with breaking the deal in 2018 when Trump did it, now that Trump has broken the deal, they think they have additional leverage. They don't, but they think they do, and so they could really blow this deal on that. A place where Biden's policy has been a little bit different from Trump's, and to Biden's credit, has been on Saudi Arabia, where he's seemed to take a little bit of a stronger stance, at least when it comes to the war in Yemen, the war against the Houthis, not the war against AQAP, which Biden wants to continue the absolutely disastrous drone war there. This article from Reuters says Saudi women rights activists Hathalu freed from jail, relatives say. And so there's a prominent Saudi women's rights activist, and I'm not gonna butcher her name again, but she's a young woman. She's been extremely brave in all of this, and she's spent the past 3 years in Saudi Arabia in a prison, and she's at least, or her family at least, has said that she's been tortured and including sexually and raped and stuff like that. So absolutely horrific what's happened to this woman. All she's really advocated for is for the women in Saudi Arabia to be treated essentially the way that Americans treat their dogs. She doesn't, it's not like she's even really advocating for equality. She just wants to be able to drive and have a little bit less on the male guardianship program and stuff like that. And so I just want to make it clear that she's not advocating for Saudi women to have all the cultural rights and everything of American women, even now, and maybe she wants that, I'm not saying, but what she's advocating for, the reforms that she's pushing, are the most minor things: to be able to drive and to leave the house without a male guardian. And yet that's what wound her up in prison for 3 years. Now, under the Trump administration, I guess Saudi Arabia felt no need or pressure to release her. Now that Biden has, told the Saudis that they can't wage their war in Yemen with absolute impunity, the Saudis are trying to make their human rights record look a little bit better by releasing her from prison. They decided not to execute 3 now I believe they're young men, but at the time they were arrested. They were minors who were just protesting. They were Shiite minors who were protesting for, more rights for their people. The Shiites in Saudi Arabia are treated like third-class citizens. And so they were scheduled to be executed, but now will only serve 10 years in prison. And so these are, pretty minor reforms. It's not like this woman's torturers are going to be held accountable, or that they're, really loosening up the rules against women in Saudi Arabia. It's not like they're releasing those young men from prison and, giving rights to their Shiite minorities, but they are taking these small minor steps that, are major in some people's lives. Like this woman being out of prison, that's huge for her, right? But these are pretty minor steps, and I think the overall goal is to for the Saudis to improve their record so that they could maintain their American support for their war in Yemen. Now, I've talked about this a lot, and I've expressed my skepticism that the Biden announcement that his policy in Yemen is changing is a lot of window dressing. However, even window dressing is enough to provoke, the Saudis to take some small steps. I thought this statement that we have here from Reuters, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with the Saudi foreign minister and discussed Yemen. And then I think importantly in here, they lay out that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed diplomatic efforts to end the war in Yemen and bolstering Saudi Arabia's defenses in a call with Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farham Al Saud on Wednesday. And so the part where that part of what they talked about is bolstering Saudi's defenses sounds awful concerning to me, because when you have things like this, the Houthi apparently carry out an attack on the Saudi airport this past week. The Saudis even admitted this time that the attack was successful, and they say started a fire in a civilian aircraft. I have no idea what actually happened here. For years, the Houthis report that they send drones and missiles into Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia constantly claims it hits nothing. The Houthis claims it hits things, minus maybe the Aramco attack in September of 2019. I can't remember a major time where the Saudis admitted to an attack going through. And so I find it very interesting that as the Biden administration is pushing for, an end to support for Saudi's offensive capabilities in Yemen, that the Houthis are then able to carry out an attack that even the Saudis admit is successful. And so if Blinken told the Saudis that, we're going to help you with defense, the Saudis let a couple of attacks come through, maybe, I don't know, but maybe that happened, or maybe they just say that attacks or admit that attacks are successful when they haven't been in the past. And then suddenly the U.S. is giving Saudi Arabia a whole bunch of military support, and they're claiming it's defensive. Of course, the Saudis have been bombing Yemen for 6+ years now. If the Houthis launch a counterattack, that's just a part of the war, although it's going to be portrayed in the U.S. like, oh my God, the Iranian-backed Houthis are carrying out this war of aggression against the Saudis, and now we have to take the Saudi side even more. Some bad news from the UK on the Yemen front is that the UK has declined to follow the US in suspending arms sales to Yemen. And this is from The Guardian. Patrick Wintour from Monday, 8th February, and it says British ministers have refused to join the U.S. in suspending arms sales to Saudi Arabia for offensive use in the Yemen war. This is important because it's something that I've highlighted on the show, and as much as I always talk about the U.S. government and the U.S. weapon sales, because I think they're the most important, because the U.S. is my government, because this is why I have the most control over. At the same time, the UK support for the war in Yemen has been absolutely critical, and if the U.S. bats off completely, the UK could probably sell Saudi Arabia enough offensive weapons to somewhat keep the war going. And so it's very interesting, and we have this great U.S. empire that really includes all the NATO countries, and they're supposed to, be our allies and help us achieve our ends in the world, and yet here you have Joe Biden taking maybe his first positive step as president, and the UK won't even go along with him. Another statement from our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. This is from Reuters. And U.S. intends to keep up pressure on Houthi leadership. And this is from Ned Price, the U.S. State Department spokesman. I think we will certainly keep up the pressure on the leadership of the movement. And so if, we're committed to helping Saudi defense, if we're going to keep up the pressure on the Houthi, it doesn't seem like Biden is ramping down this war a whole lot. Maybe he's taking it from 100 down to, 90 or 80, which is certainly better, but it's not very much. We also had the Houthi making a push, an offensive in Yemen. This is antiwar.com by Jason Ditz. Yemen's Houthis make a push for the last government stronghold in Mareb, which is a province. If you're looking at the video version of the show, I got the Mareb government right here. This is where they're making their offensive. If you're not, they're moving towards central Yemen. I understand that there's some important economic resources in this area, and so if the Houthis take it, it could be a relatively big move, especially since that the battle lines in this war haven't changed very much in the past 5 years. Last up on today's show, I'm talking about Syria. The first story I have is from Yahoo News. UN urges 57 countries to reclaim women, children from Syrian camps. And so there are still 10,000 women and children that were the relatives, husband, or wives, sons, daughters of the Islamic State fighters who came from foreign countries and brought their families with them, are held in camps in northeast Syria. And I shouldn't say that that's what these people are accused of. That's why they're in those camps. Maybe it's not the case. I'm sure a lot of people have had their fingers wrongly pointed at them through all of this. And so these people, I believe, are held in the Kurdish camps. And essentially, I don't think they have anywhere to go. The Syrian state won't take them because the Kurds hold them. Hopefully they won't bring them to Iraq because Iraq is just lining up executions for all these people. And then the host countries don't want them back because I guess they don't want to throw a whole bunch of women and children in prison. But at the same time, if you take some of these people back and let's say one of the women or children carry out a terrorist attack, then the government's going to be blamed for not doing enough to protect its people. I'm not sure if, making this call by the UN is actually going to have anything happen with these women and children. I know this has been an ongoing problem for several years now, but it is important to remember that this is happening and that these countries need to start taking back their citizens. That one of the UN officials said that Britain, China, France, Russia, and the United States are on a list of shame here. All right, so when we're looking at Biden's policy for Syria, I haven't talked about it a whole lot because he hasn't talked about it a whole lot, and it doesn't seem like anything has changed from Trump so far. Syria did signal that they're willing to talk with the U.S. if the U.S. policies are changed, but again, we really don't see anything that's a shift in U.S. policy. Jason Ditz, at antiwar.com, highlights that U.S. convoys continue to enter northeastern Syria, signaling that plans are to stay the same. We did have one announcement on the U.S. Position in Syria, and this is from Dave DeCamp, and that is the Pentagon has said that the U.S. troops are not protecting oil fields in Syria, although it doesn't seem like their mission has really changed from Trump, and so if they're just patrolling around the oil fields, but their mission isn't to protect them, I'm not seeing how there's a real change there. And those statements were from Pentagon spokesman John Kirby. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of good news on Syria, but I don't think there's a whole lot of news yet. I think it's possible that Biden may still make a good decision on this, or he can make a really bad one, or just kind of leave this stagnant and hope that it doesn't really become an issue for him the next 4 years. The problem is doing nothing in Syria is adding to a lot of suffering. The U.S. has, along with North Korea, Iran, and Venezuela, a maximum pressure campaign now on Syria with the Caesar sanctions, and not repealing those sanctions, not moving U.S. troops, and keeping up the aggressive policy where we essentially hold like a third of the Syrian landmass is not going to help the Syrian people start to live better lives. There's nothing we could do about Bashar al-Assad staying in power in Syria. Maybe that there could have been reforms that happened out of the Arab Spring, but unfortunately, the U.S. decided through the Timber Sycamore program to arm up and train the Islamists there and create a bloody mess of a civil war that is now a decade old and claimed 400,000 lives. So That's where we're at on Syria. All right, everybody. That's what I have for news today. I will be back on Monday with Will Porter. I think a lot of what we have is China news and Assange news, talking about Biden's policy on those. So make sure you're subscribed to the show somewhere so you don't miss that episode. It's going to be a great one. YouTube, Library, Odysee for the video. Libertarian Institute is where you can find the show notes page. And then audio should be up everywhere. Leave the show a rating and review it. You can. And anything you could do to support the show is greatly appreciated. Thanks, everybody. And we'll be back with another show on Monday.